running away, and I'm not qualified to speak on this, but we really like having people out to our user groups. It's a lot of fun. For me, speaking personally, it was through the user groups that kind of helped me develop a lot faster and quicker professionally. Because I learned a ton of stuff, and I learned awesome things from people like Ryan back there who was twiddling with the camera. So anyway, that's my plug for user groups. Any other questions? So I'll get into that in a second here. Don't avoid a surprise. No. Okay, we'll cover last question. Who here has committed, made a commit to an open source project, either like documentation or bug fix or feature or any type of contribution at all? Okay. So I guess my last challenge would be people who didn't raise their hands to go ahead and try and find a project because we desperately need more contributors. And it's not that hard. Because we're not that smart. All right. Time. Who here's from out of town? Who's here? Who here is not from Utah?
I live here now, but I just moved from San Diego.
Very nice. Any RSL fans here? Anyone watch the game last Saturday? That was looking absolutely amazing. Come back from down 2-0. What did you do? Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started.
Are you less nervous now?
Oh yeah, I am. Thank you for asking. I really appreciate that.
I think you should be nervous because we're a tough crowd.
Yes. So I will share this. So I was giving a tutorial like 2 years ago on Salt, and it was a room completely full of sysadmins. I'm a developer, full of sysadmins, and I'm self-taught. So there's certain things that when I was self-teaching myself, I never just kind of learned that way, and then I found out, oh, other people use other tools, but I just never got around to changing that. And so I was in a room full of sysadmins. I had a bug in my configuration file. I tab over, go to type in, I type nano space the file, and enter, and there's an audible gasp. And because most sysadmins prefer tools like Vim or Emacs, it's really like crazy, powerful, command line based editing tools. But when I was learning in the tutorials, that you can use VI. You can use Nano, and I couldn't figure out how to exit VI. It's not that easy. It doesn't make sense to hit exit, and then colon, and then Q. Oh, I want to write the file WQ. So it was a complete newbie, so I used Nano because it had hey, you hit this button to exit. So I knew. Now it's just muscle memory.
You go past plus and plus.
That's fine. But that was my experience in teaching systems. All right. Okay. So. This is Mentoring Devs into DevOps. My name is Justin. Welcome to Openwest. So I looked at the schedule and I realized I put in the business track. And each time I give this talk, I'm actually giving very, very different types of audiences. So let's do a quick engagement of the audience. Who here would qualify themselves as a system administrator? Got my one, he's my neighbor. Excellent. A developer? Okay, manager or management, we have some. And who here would consider yourself, I am a DevOps? Okay.
Define that more?
We will.
Okay.
We will. Because I think that term is not very helpful in a lot of ways. So my confession is I'm a developer, which to this crowd, it's actually not that bad of a confession. When I gave this Salt Conf, there's like 2 developers in the room. Not only that, but apparently I am Utah's best PHP engineer. Like, so I'm not only a developer, I'm a PHP engineer. And most of the admin guys don't use a lot of PHP.
Oh, is that the check you got at Steve PHP?
That is. That is.
What'd you spend it on?
I I put it in the bank to save it.
Why'd you lock it out?
$15?
Yeah, something like that. So I'm a developer, but I'm self-taught ops. And the reason why I'm in that situation is because there's no one else to do it. And actually, I bet a lot of you are on that boat where, you go to your boss and say, hey, it'd be awesome if we could hire this really awesome person to do all this ops stuff. I'm like, well, it'd be awesome if you're making revenue to do that. So, go ahead. Anyway, so about me, I'm the director of development for a company called Desert Digital Media. I work with the teams that do like KSL.com, DesertNews.com, OK.com, and a bunch of other sites. Also, the Utah PHP Group president. We meet every third Thursday of the month. uphp.org. That's if you want to check it out. I basically make and break web stuff. I do it for about 10 years. And for the Salt users, anyone here using Salt? Okay, so I've been using since .8, which is insanely early. It actually almost did not work. So this presentation is about the lessons learned that we've learned at DDM and previous jobs. It's kind of our insight into like this, of us defining what is DevOps, what do we want to accomplish with it. And we're still learning. Like I'm not a master in this at all. This is kind of the things that we found useful. Slides are posted online, so don't worry about copying notes. And feel free to ask on-topic questions. And then afterwards I'll have questions, or come talk to me at the conference, or email me, or contact me, and I'd love to chat. Okay, about DDM. These are the sites we do. We do about 10 million page views a day across all of our sites, so it makes us a little bit bigger. And we have 150 different servers that help us manage the load. So let's start with a story. So you work for an awesome tech company, and your team is working hard to build new things, and you go and you launch this new product. Sweet. And then you start adding a couple more features, and some more features, and the next thing you know, bam. You have this application that's a lot more complicated, a lot of moving parts, it's doing a lot of stuff, and but it's still pretty awesome. And she's like, awesome team, we rock. Then one day your boss calls, and he's like, hey, the competition is coming out with this new thing, we need to beat them and do something better, I want this real-time something, another, blah, blah, blah. The team all has the same collective thought, and okay. So they go and start loading up on the Red Bull, we skip that, and they start working. And they work, and they work, and they work, and they work, and about after 80 hours of trying to get this new feature done, they're like, I guess if we try for caching, this will make it work. So they go ahead and they say, hey, let's go press the button, push the production, I'm sure this will work. They call the boss, say, hey, you can relax, launch a new feature, and then go crash. Then in the morning, the users start coming in, the packets start flooding in, and the ops team's like, hey, our servers are melting, things explode, there's a massive cleanup effort, the boss gets burned, he might not be very happy with you, other coworkers make fun of your team, and it leads to very sad relative. It leads to very sad sysadmin. It leads to very sad, pretty much anyone who's involved in this. And because I'm talking to developers, so I'm sure you're all on board, but from a business standpoint, because we're in the business track, this also can lead to cost of money. Downtime's not good, wasting hours trying to fix stuff, or that could have been prevented is not good. And so we all say, you know what, we all need a better solution. So where do we start? We look at our application, look at our servers and all this stuff, and I'm like, man, we got a pile of stuff, and I don't even know where to try and start to solve this problem we have. And so that's the problem we face. So for those locally who are familiar, we have KSL.com and Desert News, and on KSL you have like a KSL Classifieds, which are pretty popular. There are cars and our homes, and all these products. And the problem is that Desert News said, hey, how can the website increase print subscriptions? Do I dare ask how many of you people have a print subscription? Raise your hands.
To something? To anything?
To a newspaper for your daily news. Okay, so you got about one. 20 years ago, everyone had their hand raised. And so we're like, okay, and same thing with the TV station. TV station, hey, there's this website, just put these things up to help the TV station out. And we're like, no, like the digital is the future of our company. We need to go in and say, let's make this the future. And so we split off and we created this company called Desert Digital Media. And so we took the properties from Desert News and KSL, and then we added a bunch more properties as well. And so we have this problem of like, we got all this stuff, and how do we like try and conquer this. Some of the problems that we faced is we had these giant messaging technologies. We had a lot of legacy code that was very tightly coupled, fragile infrastructure. And then debugging in production was a nightmare. We would have just some crazy bugs that would happen. And the worst bugs are part code, part environment. So like it works on my machine, works in the stage environment. When I have 10,000 users using it, it breaks. We're a nightmare to track down. And so we'd sit there and we'd gaze off in distance. And we looked at certain companies, like Etsy and Facebook and Netflix and Amazon. Look at all this cool stuff that they do and read their blog posts. Like, why can't we be like them? And so one day, we had a genius idea, and we said, let's hire a DevOps. We go out and hire a DevOps, and I'm not kidding, we actually said this. And there are two problems with this idea. The first problem is that we actually didn't really understand what our problem was and what we really wanted to solve. Our thought was like, well, we'll hire this DevOps and something, and profit. And for us, profit means everything works perfectly. Like, we'll hire this mystical person and everything will just work great. The second problem is actually finding people who are really good at dev and ops that meet all of your needs is incredibly hard. So as we did these interviews, we had this expectation of what this DevOps would look like. And unfortunately, when we came into the interviews, they would try their very best, but they looked a little more like normal people. And I said, well, they're not going to solve every problem under the sun. And we had 6 different directors that were interviewing, and all of us had our own different ideas. And there was absolutely no way a single person could come into our company and meet that expectation of like, oh, you can solve all of my problems and their problems and their problems. You're just going to be amazing. And so we spent 4 months trying to hire this person. And we were like frustrating our candidates, we were frustrating ourselves, and this isn't fair, like we're being silly. And so we sat down and had a quick question?
Do they want us to hire to solve all that stuff for your current infrastructure?
Yeah, for current infrastructure, we're just like, we just want someone to come in and just fix this. Like, because we read these blog posts like, oh, look at all this cool stuff. We want someone to come in and just do all of that for us. And we had about that much like understanding of our problem. And so one day our director of IT said, hey guys, this isn't working. We had an honest team discussion and say, okay, what is it that we're actually looking for? So we went ahead and we discovered a few things. And the first thing is that we got brought up, okay, what does DevOps actually mean to us? And so for us, DevOps is dev and ops. It's culture of collaboration. No one's just a dev, no one's just an op. And we're just like, no, we don't, that's their problem to worry about. Like, we all have this collective goal. The next thing is, because it's kind of hard to define that, we said, you know what? I want to push 10 times to production a day without issue. Because if I tell the developers we're going to do this, they immediately get like this sense of like flexing and this sweat starts coming down, and they can think of all the things that can go wrong. And we say, that's good. Let's start thinking about those things that can go wrong and solve those things. This kind of overarching goal gave us very tangible things to start tackling. And then everyone shares the goal of quick development, because that's really important for business. We can't take 6 months to ship something. That will just not, we can't be viable that way. But we also want things that stay up. Because it doesn't matter if I ship it in 2 weeks, if it takes me 6 months to get it up finally, running in production, that's the same problem. We also realized we had a team structure issue. This is literally what our team looked like. We have 30 devs and 2 ops. And as I've gone out and talked to companies, most companies, the structure was kind of like the same thought. And so the thought of we're going to hire this one person to solve all our problems, this wasn't very feasible. And so we realized this solution won't work. And so we looked at our team, we had a couple realizations. And I honestly believe we actually had the hardest problem already solved. We had an awesome team. We had people we liked working with. We had people who were really good to work. Like, they were nice to each other. We could communicate. We didn't have jerks. And so I think the actual hardest part we already had solved. But we just weren't operating in a very efficient way. We also realized we're not this cool startup. We're not going to have this rapid expansion in the near future. Like, we might add 5, 10 people, but we're not going to add 50. And so however we're going to solve this problem, we have to do it at our current scale. And then we realized that each project had a director of development. And we were kind of already doing that DevOps role, but we were becoming a bottleneck because we had to go to meetings, we we had to start to talk to stakeholders, and we had to worry about lots of other things. And so if there were server problems, there would be bottleneck at my end, because they're like, well, Justin has to get to that, and it take me weeks or months to get to it. The other thing we realized is that we already had some kind of DevOps-like tools, but they were all like disparate among the different teams. One team had this real-time logging, catastrophic deploys. Some had these cool alerts. Some had some config file management and server config. But the problem is they were all like siloed off into their own little project. Like they were just like these one-off things to solve this one project's problem, and not, hey, how can I solve this problem for everyone? And so we decided this strategy, it's not going to work. And so we went and we formed a different strategy. And that first strategy was, we're going to take one of our devs and promote them to become our DevOps. Now, some might say, hold on a second, this one person to solve all the problems, that we're not bringing from the outside, that was a bad idea. It's still like, you still have one person, and how are they going to do anything different? So what changed is we had a very, very well-defined role. And what we said is like, okay, this DevOps engineer, he came from my team, his name is David, he's going to own the tools that we're going to use to improve our DevOps efforts. So he's going to be kind of this person who looks at whatever logging tools or monitoring tools, he's going to own those tools. And then he can be a resource for other teams to kind of help educate us. But the teams will be responsible for the performance and whatnot, and not just this one guy. And then we had to pick someone who was easy to work with, an aptitude for kind of both systems and ops and devs, and then someone who liked to try new things. And so, while I was very, very sad to see my developer go, we were really happy because we were getting a really good guy for this position. So the advantage of promoting within is that your seasoned person who's been there for a few years, they already know the pain points. They already know the quirks. They know how the chaos works. They know, for our example, they know how we have our custom XML database that only works with specified XML, and our custom PHP module that only that can communicate with it. And he understands how the deployments are synced and secure copy, depending on which one, and how it's not all in source control and for certain areas, and he knows all that. And so he can kind of be able to approach the problem and say, hey, he's much better off trying to solve a problem. And even more importantly, though, he already knows the people and personalities on the team. So he knows that, hey, if I start going changing something, these developers will have a problem. So I know I need to go talk to them and work with them and work with their personalities. Whereas on other teams, he's like, hey, I know that they're just fine if I go do this. And so he already kind of knows the personalities and they're able to kind of mesh in a lot easier. The next thing we did is we wanted to change our team structure the way we viewed it. And so before we said, okay, we have the devs, we have the ops, and we're going to take this one guy, who's half of each, and move him over. But instead of still having this wall, is we want to kind of lay them out more in a spectrum, not groups. And so we have our devs, and we have our ops, and we have this overlay right here. And our thought was, you know what? We need to start spreading those expertise that we have in ops over to our development team. And it's not like all of a sudden every one of these people become super DevOps. It's kind of more like, it's more of a gradient type of a situation. Let's just start helping others get more experience in these kind of DevOps stuff. And so what we did is each of the different teams, we identified some devs who kind of like ops. Like, they kind of like digging into a server and looking at logs or looking, at the performance and, and kind of they like that. And they wanted to learn it. If there's anything right now, if you can throw DevOps on your resume, you'll have recruiters like flies. And maybe that's not a good thing, which you get the recruiters away by not putting it on your resume, but having those skills is very, very marketable. And so we paired these developers with some of the ops people or the directors who are already doing this work, and then we let them go run. And whenever the person, so like whenever David or Matt from my example wanted to make changes to the servers, I said, okay, you go do that. If you have questions, you can come to me, we can sit down and we can work together, but they're the ones doing the work, not me. I'm kind of more of the advisor and helping them learn. And so the third step is we realized we needed to go and increase everyone's insight, but because we're technologists, we like really cool tools. And so who here has read this blog post by Etsy about code, measure anything, measure everything? So a couple. So what this is at Etsy, and what blows my mind is Etsy helps people sell homemade goods and like things. It's like, you don't think of them like this is like the technology, like rock star, but they're like fantastic. And the one thing that came out, we said, hey, we want to measure anything and everything. And so they've created some tools and used some open source projects to say, hey, how can we help our devs get better insight into what's going on in production? And so there's a couple ways you can do that. The first one is metrics. And so there are different types of metrics that you want to be able to track. It's very common for people to have like server metrics and network metrics, like CPU, memory, number of bits and bytes going through the wire. But we also have application metrics that we actually think are just as important, if not more. Things like number of people who've registered today, or messages sent, or for us, classified ads posted, or news stories read. And so what we want to do is take all these types of metrics and funnel them into one place that everyone can look. And so we use a tool called StatsD and Graphite, and just added another one called Grafana as a cool UI into it. But we went through and said, okay, here's a way that we can go and track how our application is performing. And then we went to each developer and said, okay, let's find a place that we'd like to track. So we can say the amount of time it takes us in an email. We add that metric. We have them go in, add the code, push it, and then go look at it and go find their dashboard where it's at. And they'll say, oh, this is how I use this tool full circle. And once they have that, they're like, okay, go off and run and take care of that. And then another thing we said is, you know what? If you want 100% of the time with your stats tracking software, it can get really complex. And we just said, you know, we don't want to worry about that. We're okay with some downtime every once in a while because this is for internal only, you know, devs and ops looking at this tool. So we're okay if it goes down every once in a while for like 10 or 15 minutes. And it's very, very simple to set up. And so we, you know, we're okay with that. So this is using our old dashboard. We need to update this page. We just launched a new one. So what you would see here is I would go and measure. So this is like the content page for Desert News. So anytime someone views an article, I measure the number of milliseconds it takes. And I said, hey, after I measure that, I send off a little UDP packet, which is like a fire and forget. So that way, if it doesn't get there, it won't take the server, won't take my site down, because it won't wait. So it fires and forgets the stat. StatsD and Graphite capture that, save it, and then I'm able to pull this data out and say, okay, our mean 90, so like you know the mean of the 90th percentile, it takes about 200 milliseconds for it to run. And as the day goes on, little fluctuations. And then here's the upper limit. So okay, the upper limit 90 is saying, oh, more worst case scenarios, it takes this long to run. I can also look and see how many times it's called. So this is per second, and so we get about 200 to 300 of these pages called. It's actually not be per second, it might be like per 10 seconds. And if I was, on our news stuff, it tells you exactly what the metrics are. But I'm able to kind of look and see what's going on. And we go into the home page and whatnot. And so what would happen is I can push to production, and I would see, if like I saw this spike, I'm like, oh, I just broke something. And that's where the 10 pushes a day became really important. Because we're pushing really, really small changes. So if I push something, it's a small change, and I see a spike, and I'm like, oh, I know exactly what broke that, and I can roll it back. Whereas before we'd save up like 3 weeks of stuff, push it, and then we'd have a spike, and I'm like, okay, what happened in 3 weeks that we made that's causing this problem?
Did you say this is Graphite?
Yeah, so this is
interface is Graphite.
So this interface is a custom one we built. So what we use is we use StatsD to help collect the metrics. We store it in Graphite, and then we use a tool called Grafana to look at the to create custom dashboards. That's easy to create.
To post your UDP packets, do you have your own internal kind of tool to do that, or?
So it's like super simple, and because StatsD is so popular, you probably can find the StatsD client for any of your things. And all it is like a string, a special string that says, you know, like the name, colon, what type is it, a count, or is it a timing, or is it a gauge, and then a pipe, and then the profiling rate that it's being done at. So we have set up things where you can have it, like when we push to production, we say, hey, we push to production, we use even a little CLI one-liner script that says, you know, send a UDP packet. And so this has been extremely valuable for us to be able to go in and help our devs. Because what's awesome is before, the devs would go push something live and the next day the ops are like, hey, the servers are burning up. What did you guys do? And instead now it's like, no, the ops can, the devs can look in and say, no, I can see exactly how my stuff's performing. And the devs can go and say, I have way better understanding of what's going on in production, so I have much more control and responsibility. Because they can see if they broke something. Before they had to wait for ops to call it. And then you have the whole like, well, is it ops' fault or is it dev's fault? And this solved all that. Because no, we both have really good insight. And the same tools that the ops use to look into how things are going are the same tools the devs are using. The next thing was real-time logging. And with real-time logging, this is a lot harder to get. Metrics are little integers, small numbers going across the wire. Real-time logging typically is a lot more data. And so it can be harder and more complicated to scale. And we're still kind of trying to figure out a good balance of this. Like we're working at this. And so what we said though is, KSL and Desert News, they get a lot of traffic during the day. And instead of trying to keep logs forever, say, hey, we want to have a really small window because 99% of the time, I just want to see the logs that are happening now. I'm not doing like auditing, trying to figure out what happened 2 weeks ago. And so we started with this really small window and say, hey, once after 48 hours, the logs fall off, they get pruned, and so I can see using a tool, see what's going on. And then over time, we've been able to go in, okay, now that we have all the logs coming to the same place, I can go in and try to extend that window if I want. And so right now we're trying a combination of Logstash, Elasticsearch, and Kibana. And we're actually looking at replacing Kibana with Graylog 2. That just came out a couple weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago.
Why?
I can interface it on it better. So you kind of just like the interface. And we can still have Kibana look at the same storage. Because this Logstash is what listens to the logs on the server, and it sends it to Elasticsearch, which stores it, and then Kibana is what we use to read the data. And then, using Logstash, you can also generate statistics off your logs. So you can say, hey, if I detect the string PHP fatal error, send it to the metric. So I push it to production, and I see my errors all of a sudden spike. They should be at 0, and another 10 a second. I can go, okay, I'm going to revert my changes and try that. So the next thing, let's turn on our slide. Yeah. The next thing was tracking changes. And so for us, we adopted a motto, say everything goes to Git. And it doesn't matter what source control you use, I really prefer Git. We use GitHub Enterprise, so we, not Enterprise, we use GitHub Organizations, so we have private repositories. And then everyone has access. So if an ops person wants to look at what changed, he can. If a dev person wants to look at what changed, he can. And our server configurations go there, our code goes there, everything goes into source control. The next thing is we do all of our work through pull requests, which are kind of just really nice ways of being able to go in and say, hey, I've encapsulated this specific change, and I'll go and merge that back into what's going to go out in production. And if I need to go back and look at history, everything's in these nice encapsulated and documented changes. And then we also have, everyone has our work code review. And so in the morning, typically we'll go through and anyone who didn't write that code can sit down, look at it and say, hey, this looks good. And we don't do like crazy code review where we analyze every single line, but we'll check for things like, hey, we've had this, you were debugging it, so you turned off caching and you left that in that line in there. You probably want to remove that. Yes?
That's just forking and then doing pull requests?
Yeah.
There's not doing any branches.
So we do branches. So what we do is internally, so for all of our internal ones, we don't create our separate repositories for each developer. It's really messy trying to keep that updated. So we all use the same repository, but we all make branches. So we'll make a branch, make our changes, and we'll issue a pull request, and then another developer will go in and merge that in. We have an asterisk here because we do say, if it's a quick thing, for the local crowd, we actually have a typo. We're supposed to say Mormon instead of moron. We wanted to fix it pretty quick. And so, if it's a merge, you can totally merge a review. You have to back up your reasoning. So if you start merging in things and access to the database and making significant changes in a code review, we'll get mad. You have to be able to back and say, no, it was an emergency. We were trying to, you know, do things. So 99% of the time we have code reviewed, but if it's like little typo changes and whatnot, then we say, no, you can go ahead and merge it without it, but you have to defend your choice. Man, this thing is not working very well. Next part were deploys. So if the idea is we want to do 10 deploys a day. That's great, but we need to simplify that process. And so we went and started trying to automate our deploy process to like a single step, which actually we've kind of changed to a two-step where we say, go prepare the deploy, and it deploys all the code, and then we'll press, and they'll say, okay, everything's ready, and then you press a button, and it switches the production. And thought anyone can deploy, you know, like everyone, like our most junior dev to our senior person, you have access to the repo, you can go ahead and deploy. And then all of our deployments are logged, and one of our major requirements is rolling back is easy. Because if we're deploying lots a day, I need to be able to say, if I totally mess something up, it's going to take me 2 hours to figure it out, that mess up doesn't have to live in production. We shouldn't do that, so we can easily revert back. And then we use something called feature flags, which is basically a really fancy way of saying if-then statements in code. But it's like, hey, if this value is set to true, go ahead and use this feature. And what that makes it really easy for us is if we like say we have an e-commerce page and we launch a new widget for like recommendations, and also realize that's causing performance problems, I don't have to do a code deploy. I can just say, hey, go turn off that feature. It'll drop it from production. The code's still there, but it's not running it. And that'll solve our problems 99% of the time.
There's a question over here.
Yes.
How do you do rollbacks? I mean,
So we're using Capistrano right now. That works pretty well because what it'll do is it'll go out and create a new folder each time, and then it'll change the symlink from the last version to the new version. So it's very atomic, very quick switching. There are some problems, like edge cases we ran into that, and so we're looking at using something like Salt to do some deployments for larger scale stuff. But if it's a smaller site, Capistrano is a great way to go.
Do you deploy from master?
So it depends on the team. Some teams do. We don't, just because when I got there, that's the most what we were doing. We'd have production release branches, and we would try to do one of those a week, and then we'd merge small changes, but then when everyone got a big change. And we kind of found that, because every once in a while we would merge something to master and realize, crap, you got a bug. We're working on that, but someone's like, hey, I need this quick feature. That way I can just go switch over to my production branch, make the quick change, and then merge the production branch back into master. So that was kind of more for the more complicated, a little more complicated workflow. But I think releasing from master is fine, unless you start running into problems. That's a good place to start. All right. The next thing is tests. Whether the unit, functional, integration, acceptance. If we want to trust ourselves, we need to have tests, automated tests to back us up. And all automated test is, it's an automated process that can go test something. So unit testing can test units of code, integration and functional testing can test a larger picture. So we have lots and lots of legacy apps at KSL. And so we went and wrote a bunch of integration tests that would go in and check after we did a release, or we could run it anytime we want. Say, hey, does the sign-up form work? Hey, does this page work? Can I go look at the classifieds? Can I go post to classified? All our core stuff. Because if you're pushing a lot during the day, a developer is not going to go and say, hey, there are 100 things I need to check on the site every time I push to production. We're not going to do that manually. And so these automated tests were a great way. And then we said for our new tests, we want to, and when we went and refactored old legacy parts, we want to use unit tests. And then we built all these tests. Then after 2 months, we stopped checking them. And then we ran them again and realized, hey, there's like 10 things broken. And so we using a continuous integration, something like a Jenkins or a Travis CI, to go in and run them all the time. That way, because if you don't have something that automatically runs them, you're not going to remember to run them all the time. Yes?
Up to this point, since you guys promoted the dev to the DevOps, how long has this been to this point?
So we've been working on this kind of DevOps effort for, that's an excellent question. We started like a year and a half ago, and we've really started heavily working the promotion. Like, so we started an effort, and then about November, we're like, hey, we need to promote this guy. So he's been in there for about 6 months. And so we're still figuring things out, but we've seen way more success than when we were just trying to do it on our own and not really have a strategy and trying to hire some guy to come in. Any other questions? What time am I supposed to be quiet at? I have like 10 minutes, I think.
It's supposed to be like,
Okay,
2:50?
2:50, okay. We're doing good. All right. So that was all about kind of getting insight into what's going on in production. Then the fourth step is like, hey, our devs are going to need to learn to use the tools that our ops guys use. And so I gave this presentation at SaltConf. We're major users of Salt where I work. All that is like a remote execution and configuration management tool. And there's other talks here at the conference that go into heavily about that. But the most important thing I found with Salt is that developers can grok Salt. They can understand it. They can go in and say, hey, I have this file that says, hey, this package, Apache 2 should be installed. I can go in and say, I also need to make sure mod PHP is installed. And it'll run on the servers. But for ops people are sitting here like saying, like you're giving access to our devs to do what we do. And so we realized we need to have a safe environment for devs to learn. So who here are Salt users? Everyone? Maybe you won't get this joke. Okay. Okay, so let's think. Okay, so all the time I say, hey, Salt, run on all my servers this command. I want to delete stuff in the temporary folder. So make rmrf/temp/star. But I have a space. So what that says is go remove the temp directory and then remove everything else as well. And so run this on all. So this, in other words, would delete all the servers on our entire network in parallel, really fast, and basically hose everything. And so I like to say, Salt. Clicker's getting fired up today. I'm like, Salt's awesome, but I can't recover from that. So what we do is we created this Salt Dev Master. And what it was a version of Salt that would go out. Well, let me explain. So every server has 2 Salt minions. And a minion is basically just someone, a process that runs, typically as root, that can say, hey, I can execute commands and do things. And so we created one Salt minion that ran as root, and then we created a second one called Bob. And Bob had limited permissions. And so if Bob tried to run that same command, it wouldn't work. So it would say, hey, you don't have access to delete that stuff. And then each minion would connect to a different master. And then all the devs had access to the dev master. So if you wanted to run a command and say, hey, is this cache file on all the servers? You totally could do that because Bob had read access to do that. And then once devs are more senior devs, people that really trusted, we gave them access to the admin Salt. And that's worked out pretty well for us. And once again, everything that we use to configure our servers goes into Git. And so at work, we use a tool called Vagrant, and it basically turns on a local VM on your machine, and it can install Salt, and it can run and set up your development environment. Install Apache, install PHP or Python or Ruby or whatever floats your boat. And so for us, the developers, we own our dev environment. Ops is not in charge of it at all. And then our dev teams manage our Salt stages, which are basically the things that say how to configure the server for our dev environment. We use Vagrant Salt to do it, and then if we need to change, I don't go to Ops and say, hey, can you change my development environment? Like, no, we just use the same tools. This is an excellent way to start training our developers. So if they were working on a new feature for like a PHP application, they needed to start talking to Mongo, they would, in a development environment, say, oh, I need to have Salt install the Mongo extension for PHP. And then our DevOps people and our Ops guys can come in and offer some advice and support, but we make the change as developers. Once again, we're trying to spread this experience across more of our team. So our stage environment, which is basically, it's like production, It's like our final place we can check before we release to production. Our stage and production environments use the same result repositories, so the same code that runs there runs in both places, and we just use different branches. And then if a developer, once again, we use the Mongo example, but if they say, hey, I need the Mongo extension installed, a developer will go, make the change to the state files, and do a pull request. And then one of the ops people will take a look and say, oh, this looks good, or oh, you forgot to have a required statement, or whatever it may be. Or if the developer say, hey, I want to install everything, or say, hey, I want to make var www, give everyone access to it, the ops can go, hey, that's not a very good idea. And we manage all these changes through pull requests. Now, the ops team will be the ones who push that change out. But it's the devs who are kind of involved in that process and help that collaboration. One thing we do is, so once again, the Mongo extension example, if I know I'm going to be using Mongo in the future, I'll actually go to the dev team, the ops team first, say, hey, I made a pull request to install it on all the servers. And we'll go and run that and install it on all the servers. That way, 2 to 3 months down the road, whenever I'm ready to start releasing code that uses Mongo, I already know the servers are ready to go. We don't have these dependencies, so we'll typically make our production environment ready first, and then start working on the code. That way, when I go to release, I don't have to think, wait, did I install this in all of our servers? It's already been taken care of. And then we make this very small server changes at a time. We never, ever say, hey, I'm going to make all these changes to install Mongo, and set new firewall rules, and do all these different things all at once. Because once again, if we push a lot of changes out and one thing breaks, it's really hard to go and figure out what happened. And so we do very, very small, quick changes for our server configuration as well. And whenever we want to release something to production, we just merge the stage branch into production, call the high state, which basically says all the servers update if you need any changes. And you just do small, quick changes over time. Typically, we'll give access to our devs, to our production application servers. We can't do a whole lot of damage there. If they hose the application server, we can delete it and put it back up. But our ops and devs people, they manage like the VM hosts that run our virtual machines. They manage our physical load balancers and our firewalls. And also anything that deals with data we have to persist, like our database. Ops and DevOps manage that. As developers, we can consult with them, we can give them ideas, but that's definitely, we don't touch that stuff. Because if they go down, it's ops who gets the phone call at night, not us. So that's just kind of a caveat. And so we have this concept, we want to go in and mentor all these developers. And one of the things we came out and said, you know what, not every dev can become an amazing DevOps, and that's okay. We have some devs, they're big front-end people, they like some back-end stuff, but like system administration, they're not interested. And we said, that's okay. And so we kind of determined these different tiers of DevOps skills. And we wanted everyone to have to think like an ops person. Not be able to do, but think and say, okay, if I turn off caching, what will this do to my servers? We want everyone to have that same thinking mentality. And then we want almost everyone to be able to use these tools that get insight into our servers and be able to debug problems that are in production. We wanted to focus on, once they're kind of doing those first two things, then we'll start focusing on, hey, here's how you make changes to your configuration management to push, you make changes to servers. So you kind of start getting your feet wet in that. And then over time, through that, hey, we'll be able to cultivate and create some more people who are these awesome DevOps for each of our teams. And so now we no longer have to go out and hire not 1 or 6 or 10. We can go out and just basically build our DevOps. And so I came up here, I gave this presentation, everything's awesome for us, right? We've created our own doors internally, and everything's great, right? And to be honest, we still have our skeletons in our closet. We're still learning so much every day. We're still trying to figure things out, and that's okay. And so where we're kind of at as a DDM is all of our dev environments are using Vagrant Salt. All of our new stage and production environments, we're making salty, is the term, where we're starting to manage our servers better with these DevOps tools. We're starting to slowly migrate our legacy applications and legacy servers to use this, and we're just continuously trying to make things better. So the final question is, okay, that's great. We're DDM. That's who we are. But this is like for your teams. And you might work for a company of hundreds of people and hundreds of devs. You might work for a company of one dev or two devs. And there's a whole wide spectrum of things. And so my recommendation is to first have this honest introspection and say, okay, for our teams, what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our problems? And then what are our goals? What do we want to try and accomplish in this regard? The next step is to try and increase your insight into what's going on in production, so that everyone can understand. And then make them responsible. So go in and try and, if you don't have anything, go and set up StatsD and Graphite. It takes like 20 minutes. And start using that. And then over time, once you get that and you find bugs through that, and you're saying, hey, this is good insight, but we need some more now. We've solved all the problems that we have. You can start adding the real-time blogging. But take it piece by piece. The saying, how do you eat an elephant? It's just one piece at a time. But make make the entire team responsible for how it performs, not just the ops guys. And then I strongly believe this: if you break it, you fix it. That's how you're going to learn. If it is absolutely critical and the sky is falling, I might jump in and hurry and fix it before you. But for our team, if you fix it, or if you fix it, great too. If you break it, you fix it. And that's how you learn. You don't bail people out. And then make sure everyone can see everything. There's not our data and your data, and this is our repository and our changes, and you can't look into what we're doing. And we try and be as transparent as physically possible with everything we do. When you go to mentor, find those that have the desire and it's kind of aptitude. And aptitude doesn't mean they're already amazing at it. Aptitude is like, hey, I like figuring stuff out. I believe most devs have actually been great sysadmin. And then give them a safe environment to test. Make sure you have a staging environment. Make sure you have local dev environments. Use some sort of code review process. I'm a big fan of pull requests, but there's cool things like GitLab and other things that you can install a GitHub-like environment locally. Pay GitHub. And then whenever you're teaching mentoring, the person who's learning is the person who drives. You don't ever take over the keyboard. You can explain and coach and pair and do all these awesome things, but the person who's learning, they're the one who's driving. And it takes time. It takes a lot of time. But I honestly believe it's totally worth the investment. So, just a few final thoughts. I strongly believe team culture matters. For this to work, you have to have your team needs to be in a place that you like each other, and you can work with each other. You don't have to agree with each other all the time. We certainly do not do that where I work. But you can't ignore the team cultures aspect and then try to create DevOps efforts. They're hand in hand. And then some people say, well, I work for this big company and I'm just this one dev or I'm a one sysadmin, and how could I possibly help our team do this? And it's out of my control, and I'm going to call bullcrap. And I strongly believe in the idea of a positive influence. And things aren't going to change overnight, but I think if you are a person who just tries to be positive about things and say, hey, we don't have to have this craziness where we have no idea what's going on in production, servers are just falling from the sky, and we go down all the time, and that's just life. Say, no, we can work our way and find better ways to solve this. Like, as engineers, we are smart people who solve things. And so let's not just worry about solving how to crush code or launch features and do startups. How can we do that in a smart way where I can go to bed at night, go home, see my family, and come to work? Let's focus. Those are problems that we can solve too. Just because we don't use binary ones and zeros necessarily, we can totally solve that. And I think if anyone can go in an organization to be a positive influence and affect change. So I know there's a lot to cover. There's a lot of stuff. Are there any questions?
You guys don't do rolling deployments, I assume, from what you said. You push.
We haven't yet, but we're starting to get to the point where we kind of need to. And so that's kind of one of those edge cases where we're trying to figure out if Capistrano is a good fit or if we want to try and write something to solve it.
How did you determine in between, I assume you rolled like one tool at a time, one new tool at a time, not try to like run everybody into this whole brand new system all at once here. How could you kind of gauge how well they were, well acquainted with this next new tool before you could move on and kind of?
So what we did is we picked a tool at a time, and it kind of and once once the problems started alleviating themselves. So like once, I mean, some examples like we started implementing metrics things. We're making some changes in that regard at Medium right now. But like once I have a dev who pushes to production, he's like, hey, I implemented this metric, and I realized it was bugged, and I fixed it. Like it's becoming effective. And it's like, okay, we understand it pretty well. Maybe we'll start adding some things. And then start using Salt locally for their dev environment, and then start progressing from there. And you just kind of have to take it case by case, and it's hard because you can't I can't say I'm going to take 6 months and train everyone nonstop. But I also, if you don't work at it little by little and you kind of forget about it, it kind of goes on the wayside. And so I think it's just being consistent. If you're like in a management position at all or a team lead, I personally find like the one-on-ones are probably the best way to help accomplish that. You have 10 minutes, 15 minutes down with one of your devs and shoot the breeze and see how they're doing. So that's why I found very effective. And I think as long as you're just applying just regular, consistent effort, and not like massive amounts of effort, just consistent amounts of effort, and you'll start seeing change. Yes?
Where'd you get all the awesome logo photos for your slides?
Flickr. And actually, I think I might have deleted my credit slide. Yep. So let me hurry in. I'll post these photos online. It's all Flickr, Creative Commons. There's a huge community of people who love taking awesome pictures of Legos. And so yeah. Any other questions?
With rolling deployments, do you guys have to bake in like versioning into your app, or are you guys thinking of?
Our versioning are commits, basically. And then when you use Capistrano, it'll like go and make it. So what it does is, if I need to roll back a version, because it already has those folders created, and it'll keep it last 5, you can configure that. It just says I have like folders 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I make 6, and I symlink to 6, and then it's like, oh wait, we made a problem. Resymlink to 5, which we know is working.
Sorry, I mean if like some of your servers are running one version of code, and let's say binary servers are running the most recent. That's what maybe guys have long term.
Yeah, so we make sure everything's running the same way. That's we haven't really approached rolling, and if we were to do like rolling things, it'd be more because we try to keep the smaller the things that you push to production, the less complexity you need. So if you were in a situation like a security firm that did certain things and you have to go through a larger deployment process, then we'd probably have to look at those larger things. But the smaller you keep the changes you push to production, the less complexity and overhead you have to maintain with that. Any other questions?
So, what is your website?
JustinCarmony.com is my personal one. It's my blog.
Okay.
And then my company is desertdigital.com. And if you wanted to buy or sell something, go to ksl.com. We like that we beat Craigslist. We're the only region in the U.S. where Craigslist is number 2. We're number 1. And I don't even work on that product. I love that I get to brag for them. They're awesome guys who work on that stuff. Any other questions? Yes.
Your metrics, you're using stats, it seems, I mean, from what I saw, you're basically pushing time-based metrics is pretty much all you're doing, which is good for them saying, okay, did I just break something? Did I just, am I going to get beat up on by my sysadmin or whatever? But if your dev team is responsible for more, if they answer to the SEO team, if they answer to the marketing team, if they answer to the head of the department, and they want to use that for different key metrics, can they actually push in success events and other things?
So yeah, what I would do is, so that's a great group. So let's take the example of like these are account creations. And so what we'll do is we'll fire off an event, and you can send out counts. And that's what, the purpose of StatsD is it'll get these counts. So if you have 10 of those events happen in a second, it'll add that, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. Oh, I need to save a metric, and it'll go and say, instead of saying I need to save, you don't have to worry about keeping track of how many happen per second. StatsD does that. It'll say, okay, for this metric name, save 10. The problem though is that because we kind of like to keep StatsD for internal, like it's for like how the health of the systems. We've tracked them like business things, like how have ads, how have this one client's ads performed, and then they want a dashboard to read that. That's a big. StatsD is not great for pulling a lot of data out of it. And so what we ended up doing was is that we'll use like a tool like Omniture or Google Analytics or someone else, and we'll fire that event at the same time. And that way you can, I don't trust my CEO. I love Clark to death. I don't trust him to be able to interpret the data in StatsD, but he can figure out Omniture, and he looks at it all the time. And so if he wants some regular insight, I'll make sure that data's in there as well.
But it seemed like a really good pulse on the system as to how well it was working, but it seems very one-dimensional, where when our developers are asked to do a whole lot more than just make sure they don't break things.
Yeah.
It seems like it would also be very healthy to have some other metrics in there.
Yeah.
But then you ended up pushing it to your Omniture
Analytics or...
And at the same time, then maybe I should get into overhead.
Yeah. Yeah. So we can chat more after. All right. Thank you, everyone.